Chapter 8. The title of Chapter 8 is A Privileged Family. The Frisian clock in the hallway struck 11 o'clock as the group from the dining room marched past. A Frisian clock is from the island of Friesland. It had been 8 hours since the Gestapo had raided the Bayeux. Casper ten Boom broke rank and walked over to the clock. He opened its glass door and reset the weights. It would not do to let the clock run down, he said, as he reached for his hat. Corrie put her arm around him as they walked out of the Bayeux. Outside they were herded together with the people who had been attending the prayer meeting and were handcuffed together to form a long chain. Corrie was linked at the wrist to her father on her right and to Betsy on her left. As she stood in the cold, dark alley, 100 images raced through her mind. She thought of playing hoops with Nolly, of waiting for the streetcar to stop outside the clock shop and deliver Tante John's back from one of her meetings, of the foster children organizing running races from one end of the alley to the other, of Kick waiting silently at the side door to escort a guest to safety. And then there was the horror of the present. Corrie was the captive of an army that had invaded her peaceful country, and now that invading army stood ready to tear her family and world apart. One of the Gestapo officers barked an order for them all to march, and they began to make their way along the alley towards Smedstraat and the Haarlem police headquarters. It took only a few minutes to reach the headquarters, but it took more than 2 hours to be processed. Finally, well after 1 a.m., Corrie got to lie down on a thin mat on the floor of the gymnasium at the back of police headquarters. The gym had been turned into a large holding cell for all the people the Germans had rounded up that day. Corrie felt so wretchedly ill. She didn't care that the mat was lumpy and the cold wooden floor beneath was hard. She was just glad to be lying down again at long last. The Gestapo had wanted to let Casper ten Boom go, but he refused to agree to their demand not to shelter any more Jews. So now he, Corrie, Betsy, Nolly, Willem, and Peter all huddled together on the mats on the floor. None of them knew what lay ahead. Casper ten Boom, seeing the concern on the faces of his children and grandson, spoke up. "Never forget," he said, his blue eyes shining, "what a privileged family we are." Corrie felt tears cascade down her swollen face as he spoke. Now, cascade's a vocabulary word. Something falling or rushing forth in quantity. "God, help me to never forget those words," she prayed silently. And what were the words again? Never forget what a privileged family we are. Through the rest of the long night, Corrie tossed and turned on her thin strip of gym mat. She prayed for those left behind in the angel's den. She asked God to somehow keep them all safe. Slowly, the pale morning sun filtered through the high windows of the gymnasium. People lying on the mats around the large room began to stir. Baskets of soft white bread rolls were handed around by the Dutch policeman. Corrie caught sight of Rolf van Vliet. He nodded slightly at her. She knew there was little he could do for them now. Corrie tried to force down a piece of bread. It could be the last food she would have for a long time, but her lips were still too swollen and sore to bite and chew. She still felt feverish from the flu. After about 15 minutes, German soldiers marched into the gym. An officer yelled for the prisoners to form a line and march outside to a waiting bus. Corrie and Betsy reached for their father and pulled him up from the mattress. He seemed older and more frail than ever after his night in the crowded gym. Corrie wondered how long he would survive in such conditions. As they walked out of the Haarlem police headquarters, Corrie was shocked to see 100 or more people lined up along the sidewalk. 100 or more people lined up along the sidewalk. It was a risk for them to even be out on the sidewalk in such a group. Corrie knew that they had come, regardless of the personal risk, to show their support for the residents of Haarlem, whom the Nazis had arrested for doing nothing more than offering kindness and protection to innocent human beings who were being hunted down like wild animals. The prisoners stood in the bus as it wound its way through the streets of Haarlem. Corrie stared out the window, trying to fix the beauty of the spring tulips and pink plum blossoms in her memory. After the bus had rumbled along for a while, it came to a halt. The prisoners were herded off and loaded in onto large trucks with canvas canopies on the back. Canopy, a cloth protective covering. Vocabulary word. Corrie hoped and prayed that they were not being taken to Germany. She breathed a sigh of relief when one of the other prisoners, a man with a bandaged hand, pointed out that they were headed west towards the coast. They're taking us to the prison at Scheveningen. I don't know how to say it. Scheveningen. Maybe it's Scheveningen, the man predicted. He was right. After more than an hour rolling through the countryside, the truck lurched to an abrupt stop. The sides of the canvas canopy were unlaced and thrown open. Then the yelling began. Corrie wondered why every German occupying Holland had to yell so loudly. Her head was already throbbing from the effects of the flu, and the last thing she needed was someone yelling in her ear. She climbed down from the truck. "Quickly! Noses against the wall! Now!" yelled one of the German soldiers, pointing to the high concrete wall that surrounded the prison courtyard. The crowd surged toward the wall, carrying Corrie along with it. Corrie found herself facing the concrete wall, glad to have something to lean against. Slowly, so as not to draw attention to herself, she turned her head from one side to the other. She spotted Willem, Nolly, and Betsy to her right, but she could not see Peter and her father anywhere. She felt panic rising in her. Anything seemed bearable as long as she could stay with her family. Corrie dared not look down at her watch, but she figured they had all been standing with their noses against the wall for about an hour and a half. She was so weak from the flu, it was amazing she'd been able to stay standing for so long. Finally, from behind, someone barked instructions. "Female prisoners, to the right! Follow me!" Corrie turned around quickly, hoping it would give her time to scan the group for her father and Peter. Betsy and Nolly jostled their way over until the three sisters were moving together. Corrie spotted Peter standing farther along the wall, but could not see her father. She kept searching for him as the crowd of women moved towards a door to the right. Finally, her shoulders relaxed. There he was. Casper ten Boom was the only person in the courtyard sitting on a chair. Corrie marveled at how peaceful he looked. It was as if he were sitting in his favorite chair at the Bayet, smoking a cigar and listening to a concert on the radio. On an impulse, Corrie yelled, "Father, God go with you!" Her voice echoed through the courtyard. Casper ten Boom turned his head and smiled. "And with you too, my daughters," he called back. It was the last time Corrie, Betsy, and Nolly were to see their father. Corrie grabbed Betsy's arm and they stepped in line to follow the other women. Corrie's heart thumped loudly in her chest. She wondered whether she would be punished for yelling in the courtyard. If she was punished, it would be worth it to have heard her father's voice one more time. The metal doors clanged shut behind them. The women were all in a wide hall with a concrete floor. Along the middle of the floor ran a strip of seagrass matting. Corrie stepped onto it, grateful to have a little cushioning under her feet. "Off the mat, now!" yelled the guard. "Prisoners are not permitted to step on the mat." Corrie and a group of other offenders stepped back onto the concrete. Corrie wondered how many other stupid rules the prison had. The women waited in a long line while their personal information was taken one more time, and they were stripped of their personal belongings. Corrie took off her watch and her mother's wedding ring and dropped them into a manila envelope. She was certain she would never see them again. Once all of the women had been processed this way, a female guard yelled for them to follow her. She picked up a clipboard and they all headed down the hall. On each side were thick metal doors with numbers on them. The guard halted outside the first door and read a name from the list. It was one of the members of the prayer group. The woman staggered forward, a shocked expression on her face. Corrie felt sorry for her. Less than 24 hours ago, the woman had been an innocent participant in a prayer meeting above a clock shop. Now she was about to be locked up in a prison cell. And that's where we're going to stop for part 1.